Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kelly Andrews. I'm from Healthy Cities Illawarra, and a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for giving up your lunch hour this Friday for our 9th Friday Forum. The topic today being building a more sustainable, resilient and local food system. So before I introduce our speakers, I would like to acknowledge the Dharawal people on the lands on which I am coming from you today. You're more than welcome to put a little indication of the country that you're coming from in the chat, so we get to be educated as to the variety of our audience or the reach of our audience. And just a little bit of housekeeping also, if you could just keep yourself off camera and muted, just for to keep the focus on the presenters, and they will present, and then I'll come back after that to facilitate a Q&A. So without any further ado, I'll introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Amy. She's the one live with the blue sky above her head. She'll be off camera soon because she's working in the Green Connect farm as we speak. But Amy holds a PhD with a Bachelor of Public Health. She's a researcher, sustainability doer, and advocate, a food volunteer with Stir It Up and Green Connect. She's on the Food Fairness Illawarra Coordination Committee and a Waste Not Home chef. So since mid-2019, Amy's been working on a project which she'll share with us today, exploring local level policy initiatives relevant to healthy, sustainable and equitable food systems. She's interested in an important intersect between the community-based initiatives and enabling policies at all levels of government. And because government can't implement all of the on-ground activities that our society and our ecosystems need, their policies need to enable rather than inhibit or obstruct the grassroots initiatives. And we've got a variety of people in the audience today from not-for-profit, but also some local government organisations and bigger government entities as well. So welcome. And Berbel France is our second speaker, and she is the Food Fairness Illawarra Coordinator, a Health Promotion Officer with Healthy Cities Illawarra, and the brains behind our new Wollongong online farmers market. Berbel's a passionate advocate for fairer and more resilient and sustainable food system. She has a great background in supply chain management and a master's in sustainability science, and actively works towards change as in her program manager role for food security and food sustainability with Healthy Cities Illawarra. She is also the founder of Hidden Harvest, the coordinator of the Community Coalition Food Fairness Illawarra, and as I said, the instigator of the Wollongong online farmers market. So I'm going to take myself off camera. I'll hand over to our presenters and I will be back soon.
Hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me to present in this Healthy Cities Illawarra Friday Forum on food systems. Please excuse me using a pre-recorded presentation even when I am here live with you. I'm coming to you from Green Connect's urban farm in Warrawong on lovely Dharawal country, and extend my immense gratitude and respect for the custodianship of the Wadi Wadi people who cared for and honoured this beautiful country for tens of thousands of years. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Seeing as I'm digging in dirt, or mud rather, it isn't very practical for me to try to speak to you live for this part, but I'll be there in the discussion time. Today, I'd like to talk about a research project I've been working on for the past 3 years, what I've learned and how we might be able to apply it to our local area to build a more sustainable, resilient and local food system. This research is funded by an ARC Discovery Project grant and involves a collaboration between the University of Sydney, the University of Wollongong and the William Angliss Institute. Why food systems? Why do we care about them? What even is a food system? Food systems are the web of actors, processes and interactions involved in growing, processing, distributing, consuming and disposing of foods. That could be any system, but what about sustainable food systems? Those systems mean that we achieve food security and optimal nutrition for everyone in ways that do not compromise our ability to ensure food security and nutrition for future generations by nurturing and preserving the social, environmental, and economic foundations. Sustainable diets are one part of this. We're all eaters, we're all citizens. We all have a role to play. We do, but so do institutions, governments, businesses, community groups, the media, etc. The problems are that across our food system, we are not being sustainable and we're not being healthy for us or for the planet and ecosystems on which we depend. We've got an increasing global population, so we need to balance producing enough food for everyone, but not just any food, nutritious food. And we need to do it in a way that means generations and generations into the future have a planet to live on. We need to protect soil fertility, arable land, biodiversity, water, culture, and dignity. These are problems that didn't pop up overnight. They've become institutionally embedded in legal and regulatory frameworks. They've become reinforced by concentrations of political and corporate power. And if you're interested in that part of things, I highly recommend reading and listening to Jennifer Clapp. These problems have been cooking up for a very long time, so the solutions and pathways to a healthy, sustainable, and equitable food system are also going to be a long game. It will require whole of systems, long-term, collaborative, multi-sectoral approaches. There is way too much for me to go into today about the problems with our food systems, but some of the things that drive my fear for my future, let alone the futures of the kids my friends are having at the moment, are our slothful pace in addressing climate change, and the interrelationships between climate change and food and climate change. Pollution and scarcity of water, financial underappreciation of farmers, and broad changes to society that have shunted good food from being an essential necessity and something that was cherished in homes to a commodity and something that people need to make time for and don't have the money to afford. An issue for us in Australia is the glaring gap in our policy context surrounding food systems. No one is responsible for food systems. Sure, there are departments responsible for issues related to food, but there is nothing binding these together, making sure that they're coherent and working toward the same positive goals. There is a great recent piece of research from the University of Sydney and the George Institute for Global Health that shows there are 11 separate Australian federal government departments with some responsibility for food policy. At a state level, this year we've had the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into Food Production and Supply, but we're yet to see the outcomes of this, if any. Okay, so that all sucks, but we can't give up. So what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? For the past 3 years, I've been working on this project that is looking at food system governance at the local level. By local level, I mean local governments or councils, and also civil society groups. Before this, we didn't really know much about what Australian local governments were doing from a policy perspective about food systems and issues. And governance is essentially about the formal or informal structures, policies, actions, processes for decision-making, customs and assumptions that are in place that shape how we think about and deal with any given issue. Overall, our project aimed to determine the status and nature of involvement in food system issues by Australian local governments and civil society organisations, and to identify enablers and barriers they face. We wanted to be able to identify pathways to strengthen food system governance at the local level, including through an integrated set of recommendations for policy and legislative change. To answer these questions about how councils and civil society are involved in food system governance, we conducted a series of studies. We started off by mapping the food-related policies of all councils in New South Wales and Victoria, that's 207 in total, to see what they were doing in relation to a framework of 34 recommendations for local government action on food systems. I won't go into the details on the methods of this, but there are resources on our website that explain it. We followed this up by sending a survey to all of the local governments to check if we'd missed anything and to start exploring the factors that help or hinder their involvement in food system governance. We took a deeper dive into the processes of food system policy development and implementation, and again, the barriers and enablers through case studies with 3 local governments in New South Wales and 3 in Victoria. But councils aren't the only factors involved in food system governance at a local level. Civil society and community-based organisations are also present. So we also conducted a survey of these civil society groups around Australia who self-identified as being involved in food system governance. Again, we followed this up with some case studies, 9 in total, to understand the nature of their work and how they were involved in policy making decisions and the like. By way of an overview of the results, I hope you've all had your reading glasses prescription updated so that you can read this. Of course, I don't expect that. To view a full-size version of this where you can zoom in as needed, you can go to the URL shown on the slide here. It's also available through our project website, and we'll circulate a copy of these things to everyone in follow-up emails. Essentially, we found that overall, only 13 of the 207 local governments had what we called a dedicated food systems policy or strategy that drew together the different components of the food system in an integrated way. Of these, only 2 were in New South Wales. We found that the recommendations local governments were most commonly involved in were food safety regulations, sustainable local food production, food losses and food waste, education and events, and drinking water access. The least common areas were providing dietary advice during pregnancy, economic measures to improve affordability and encourage consumption of healthier foods and discourage less healthy, restricting unhealthy food in local government vending machines, and restricting unhealthy food advertising. We also found that Victorian local governments were ticking more boxes from our framework than New South Wales local governments, and metropolitan or urban local governments were more active than regional and rural local governments. In terms of what the statements within council strategies and policies were, you can find all of this in the database we created. The database is available through our website and allows you to search by keywords, council, state, region, or the domain and topic of our framework. This is really useful because it means that instead of spending 18 months like it did for us to look at different policies, people can now search in a click or two to see what councils are doing. There's some homework for you after this. Have a look around. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at how our local Illawarra region went in this policy mapping. Our data showed that we're definitely not as strong as some of the other local governments. Here, I've got a comparison of the number of the areas from our framework, so that was out of 34, that these local governments had something about in a policy or strategy. And comparing the 3 Illawarra local governments to the local governments in each state that ticked off the greatest number of recommendations from our framework, we've got Canada Bay in metropolitan Sydney and Bendigo in regional Victoria. Our local governments were pretty present on economic development issues, affordable housing, food safety, and food waste. But their policies didn't address many of the recommendations within the health and wellbeing section of our framework, nor the sustainability and environment section. So there's definitely room for improvement. I'm now going to speak briefly about the civil society components of our research. For the survey, we were interested in understanding the actors in this space, who is out there, what are their characteristics, what they're doing, and the barriers and enablers they face. We had an online survey that was open to any Australian civil society organisation that self-identified as being involved in food system governance, and this was available between March and July last year. We received 43 valid responses to the survey, which we suspect might only be a fraction of the organisations actually involved in food system governance in Australia, but getting survey responses is always a challenge. Most were non-government organisations, and we had 6 social enterprises, some food-specific coalitions, businesses, and a collaborative research project. Around 2/3 of the organisations had been involved in these sort of activities for 10 years or over, but a couple were new kids on the block that had been active for less than 1 year. For the organisations that responded to our survey, the sectors they were most involved in were food-related education, food security, policy advocacy, sustainability environment, and research. And the types of activities they conducted or were involved in ranged quite a lot. There were very on-the-ground activities such as food growing, distribution, and community education, and more distant or desk-based activities such as research and advocacy. Our survey also asked the organisations what factors enabled and hindered their work in food systems. Interestingly, all of these factors listed on the slide were identified as both enablers and barriers. For example, while participants identified the availability of funding as something that helped their activities, an overall lack of funding was a major barrier. Likewise, they listed having data as useful because it allowed them to take contextually relevant, evidence-based approaches, but also pointed out that data on a variety of issues and outcomes is lacking, incomplete, or outdated. One of the problems with research to date, from our project and anywhere else in Australia, is that we still haven't really answered the question of what works. To answer this, we need better data and evaluation. We need to know what the baseline is for a variety of variables that we would consider markers of a healthy, sustainable and equitable food system. Things such as dietary intake and health outcomes, soil fertility, biodiversity metrics, and food security statistics. But one of the issues is that we don't have a strategic national way of tracking these that also allows and shows local level nuances. But the logical answer seems to be that given we're talking about food systems, systems-based approaches would be a great option for addressing these issues. Local governments can be creating dedicated food system policies that draw together the work they're already doing, highlight gaps, and drive a more coordinated approach. This also needs to be mirrored at state level by a statewide, integrated and comprehensive food system and food security plan, or something to that effect, that sets objectives and evaluates against targets, and which empowers local governments and communities to set local objectives and work toward their achievement. The plan should be implemented and overseen by a new whole-of-government food systems committee and be accompanied by dedicated funding of an adequate amount for local governments to implement on-the-ground solutions. We included these ideas in submissions to the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into Food Production and Supply. We also included recommendations such as the New South Wales State Government establishing public health and wellbeing and climate frameworks, such as the ones that exist in Victoria, that would require and enable local governments to develop a public health and wellbeing plan, which would provide an in for food system priorities, and also bring in the relationship to and between climate change. Reflecting on what was said by local governments we spoke with as case studies, some of them described themselves as facilitators. They relied on partnerships and community organisations and businesses to implement activities in their food system action plans. A quote was that council can't do it all. We needed others in the community to lead and to deliver actions where we can't, in spaces where we don't work. Which brings us to the connection between the two sections of this research project: how local governments and civil society need to work together in strategic, coordinated, meaningful ways to achieve the outcomes we want. A coordinated approach is needed to ensure we're not unnecessarily duplicating work and wasting resources. Collaboration also allows for information sharing and learning from others' experiences, so we're not reinventing the wheel. Where can we go from here? I've already covered the first point, but I've included it again to reiterate the fact that local governments do have a role to play in all of this. Joined-up policy and cross-departmental collaboration for a truly whole-of-food systems approach. An obvious in that I see for the Illawarra councils is a climate framing. Each of the councils has pledged on climate action, but currently available strategies and actions don't really or at all address the importance of food in climate. Our case study councils said that climate was a motivator for them, particularly Canada Bay, and I see this as a very feasible policy rationale in our region too, given those pledges. But governance isn't only about governments, and the things that we want as citizens are also fundamentally important. We're in the fortunate position that we live in a country where we have the opportunity to make our opinions, wants, dreams, and aspirations heard and acted upon. But that means we need to speak up. What to ask for though? If you're not a researcher or practitioner in a food-related or public health field, this might be a hard question to answer. But you can take guidance from what you see around you and from the experience of others. Ask to get your local council to sign the Glasgow Declaration and join the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. Our database is a resource for you too. You can look to see what others' areas are doing, and if you come across something you'd like to see in your council area, write to them and tell them as much. And my final suggestion for now, which will mean I can hand the baton over to Burble, is, for everyone listening, join a civil society organisation. If you do want to know anything more about this piece of research, head over to our website. But if you still have questions, you're welcome to get in touch with me or the project lead, Belinda. Thanks, over to Burble, and then I'm looking forward to the discussion time.
But thank you, Amy, for your fantastic presentation, as well as phenomenal research that you and your research team have undertaken over the last few years. The findings and outputs that are already instrumental to driving this important conversation at so many levels. And with the rising cost of living, as well as the climate crisis, the need to have and act on this conversation is more important than ever. So I'm Purple Friends. I'm the project manager in the Foods, Sustainability and Community Nutrition team here at Healthy Cities Illawarra. And in this position, I share most of my time between coordinating Food Fairness Illawarra and launching the Wollongong Online Farmers Market, the two topics you will shortly know a lot more about. Like Amy, I'm presenting from Jarowair country, although unfortunately not with my hands in the earth, but from the office. I, however, would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this beautiful country and recognise them as the first agriculturalists who continue to inspire us through their knowledge and ecological land management. For anyone who's not familiar with Food Fairness Illawarra, we are a community coalition that has been working since 2005 to make healthy and sustainable food available and affordable for all. Recognising the need for collaboration, we work towards this vision together with our local councils, our local health district, the university, and a wide network of individuals, community groups, charities, and non-government organisations. To navigate the complexity of making healthy and sustainable food available and affordable for all, our work is underpinned by the 4 dimensions of food security. Starting off with availability, it's in our aim to grow a vibrant local food culture and economy which supports our growers and producers. Access, to enable Illawarra residents to access affordable, culturally appropriate, nutritious and sustainable and local food. Use and utilisation, to enhance food knowledge and skills within our community to make healthy food choices the norm and accessible to all. And last, stability, which is not really something we have much control over. Looking, for example, at the catastrophic weather patterns and global pandemics impacting our food supply significantly. However, ensuring a coordinated and well-structured coalition that enables collective action is something that we do have in hand and has been proven vital during disasters like I mentioned above. Our key ingredients to enable collective action and work towards these important goals are, first of all, connection and collaboration, bringing our community together to connect with each other, share information and resources to continually strengthen our local fair food movement. We advocate highlighting local issues and lobbying for policy and planning developments that contribute to a fairer food system. We empower, providing the tools and highlight opportunities to participate in building a fairer food system. We educate, driving the fair food conversation across all levels of society through our colourful and fresh social media challenge website and newsletter. We contribute to research and utilise the evidence base to inform FFI activities where we can. And last but not least, a little bit of governance to maintain our coordinated and well-structured coalition. However, all of this wouldn't make much of a difference if we weren't surrounded by an active, fair food community, like many of you here today. And to get a sense of the food champions amongst us, I actually would like to invite you, or like anyone who's involved with an organisation or an initiative that contributes to a fairer food system, to please share the name, website or social media of the organisation in the chat. Whether you volunteer at a community garden, are part of a society, work for an organisation that facilitates cooking workshops, or lecture in the food space, we actually love to hear from you. And there's absolutely no stress for anyone who's not active in this space yet, because I'm actually going to share some great opportunities to get involved. Collective action. As Amy highlighted, there is a lot of room for our local councils to improve when it comes to their policies and strategies to build a more sustainable and resilient local food system. Particularly knowing that our region actually was ahead of its time and used to have a standalone Illawarra regional food strategy, which recognised the central role that food plays in our lives, communities, economy, and the environment. A strategy that described how the Illawarra councils could work together in partnership with our community agencies, businesses, and organisations towards a vibrant, sustainable, local food system that is resilient, prosperous, fair, and secure. While this is something we obviously constantly advocate for to be renewed, as Amy said, councils can't do it alone. We all have a role to play when it comes to our food. In the following slides, I will highlight several practical tools and avenues we have developed to empower our community to actively participate. I'm starting off with our Fair Food Field Guide, which has been developed to provide an overview of practical and digestible steps we each can take to participate in a fair food system, from ensuring food security for all, growing your own food, minimizing food waste, and eating well. Each of our 6 guide chapters hold a set of participation options which correspond with corresponding information, resources, and downloads. For example, the Growing Your Own Food chapter includes the different pathways you can get growing, from planting a veggie garden to growing herbs and small space gardens, growing with kids, keeping chickens, joining a community garden, keeping bees, composting, and building healthy soils. Next is our comprehensive Fair Food Directory, which was developed to showcase and provide an overview of the great variety of fair food educators, advocates, producers, and assets we are blessed with in the Illawarra, from school and community gardens to organisations who accept food donations and providers of fair food volunteer opportunities. Particularly our low-cost and free meal directory was proven to be an invaluable tool during the COVID lockdowns, when we saw new communities being pushed into food insecurity, as well as many of our food relief providers altering their service provision. Having an up-to-date overview of that was easily shared with our community was a vital resource during these challenging times. If you know of an organisation that is missing from our directory, please let us know, because we would love to include them. Followed by our interactive Fair Food events calendar, which provides an overview of all the awesome fair food events that are hosted in and by our community. Everyone is invited to contribute to this calendar as long as the event in some way contributes to a fairer food system. And while looking at our events calendar, it wouldn't be a better place for me to highlight 2 very exciting events that are coming up. First of all, tonight we have the official opening of the Art of Food Waste by Hidden Harvest, who are exploring the issue of food waste through different art mediums. I reckon a night not to be missed. Within the same exhibition, utilising that same space, we have partnered with Hidden Harvest to host an event called Toasties, Talks and Tinnies, bringing to you a panel to chat about building community food resilience, which not only includes Amy and myself, but also Sarah from Pope's Produce and Rod Logan, who's the market gardener at Green Connect and the Manuna Community Garden, and also Cleona McQuire, who is a First Nations officer at Greening Australia. Anyway, I hope to see you all there. While talking about events, another exciting resource is our Sustainable and Healthy Events Guides. As any gathering of people can have an adverse impact on the environment and can easily adopt unhealthy practices, from food miles to the consumption of unhealthy refreshments and generating avoidable food waste. This guide, with an easy checklist and useful signage, empowers our community organisers to host events in a way that minimises potential negative impacts on the environment and our health. Besides the many benefits of hosting a sustainable and healthy event, we see it as an important act of activism in building a better food system. Leading by example will motivate others to do the same. And last, but surely not least, is the Wollongong Online Farmers Market, launched by Healthy Cities and Food Fairness Illawarra to grow a more resilient and sustainable and local foods economy for our community, our producers, our environment, and our future. Working together with over 28 amazing local producers, the Wollongong Online Farmers Market is here to give our community convenient access to the best sustainable produce from our region, exclusively stocking food that is grown or produced in a socially and environmentally responsible manner within the boundaries of the Illawarra and adjoining LGAs. Initiated to provide local producers, including emerging and backyard growers, with an additional distribution channel, while alleviating barriers experienced at physical markets like staff and stall fees with no guarantee of sales, as well as avoidable food wastage. The Wollongong Online Farmers Market is built on the Open Food Network, which is an Australian-based non-for-profit software program or platform that provides the vital infrastructure to build shorter, fairer, and more transparent food supply chains. This more localised food system means lower food miles and emissions, as well as a larger portion of revenue is retained within our local economy. So how does it work? Each week, our producers let us know what's in stock and ready to harvest, allowing us to open our virtual doors on Wednesday at midday for our community to fill their carts with goods from across the region till about Monday night. As soon as all the orders are in, our producers are informed of their share of the order. They will get harvesting and packing to get the goods to us on Thursday morning, just in time for our community to collect that afternoon. If you haven't had the pleasure to shop with us, the Wollongong Online Farmers Market provides another fantastic opportunity to actively participate in building a more sustainable, resilient, and local food system. To conclude, here are some easy ways to get involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Birbal. Thanks, Amy. Do you want to put your lovely face back on, Amy? And if anyone has a question, please, put it in the chat. That was very informative. I might kick off with a question to both of you, just around the stalling of that regional local food plan that has been sitting on the shelf since 2018, and what efforts that FFI have gone to try and reenact it, or what barriers councils have sort of presented to you as to, you know, what's holding that up and what can maybe, you know, restart that kind of regional conversation again. So I just wondered if either of you could talk to that a little bit.
I'm happy to do so, but I don't actually know much about it other than it being a funding issue, and actually seeing all three councils not actually recognise food to much of an extent at all in their current CSPs. It's actually quite concerning, but I did notice that Kat Blakey actually just joined. So being a councillor, she might actually have a little bit more insight into why Wollongong hasn't taken the lead on something like this.
I too don't have a specific answer to that question, Kelly, but drawing more broadly on conversations that we had with local governments throughout the project, even the ones that have really incredible, comprehensive, cross-departmental and community food system strategies, the constant barrier that they have is funding. So it's one thing to have a plan, having funding for implementation is another, and it's not something that is funded at a state level. So programs are constantly implemented on a project by project basis, and council staff instead spend most of their time looking for grants instead of doing the action plans that they've set out. So it's reflective of what Birbal said around that more strategic commitment from local government, but even for those that have it, and that's what the Illawarra Regional Food Strategy was. We had the strategy, but there was no funding for implementation. So until that's available, anyone can have a pretty policy or strategy, but it's never going to happen on the ground.
Fair enough. It's not uncommon to NGO issues. And I did have one other question just around the, maybe Burble could give us a bit of an insight as to the first few weeks or months of the Wollongong online farmers market and how it has affected the local food economy.
Yes, thanks, Kelly. It's been really, first of all, really interesting to bring over 28 different local producers together, particularly during this time where we see that the weather has been impacting a lot of our local producers. So we have, for example, seen our offering of fresh produce being quite small to start with, because we're having that first-hand experience of our producers not having lost a lot of their crops, having been flooded some of their crops, actually some of their crops being rotten, which is absolutely horrible to identify, but it's particularly during those times that it is by standing together with our local producers and supporting them that it is so important. And yeah, I think having operating the Wollongong online farmers market for only 3 months, we're actually seeing that we're I guess redirecting over $25,000 back into our community, which is fantastic that we have that immediate impact into our local economy, which then as an investment also has a direct impact on jobs and the viability of our local producers. Because while we're seeing a rise of expenses and a rise of our food prices, we're also seeing our local producers struggle with some of these increased prices of petrol. And I think it is a really important time to really decide whether we want our local producers to survive this challenging time, and to really think about what the alternative is if we don't have our local producers. Because if we don't support them, who will?
It's a great point. Yeah, really great point. And I have to admit, I bought some salad. What was the one? I came into the office just raving. I didn't think salad greens were
post-produce salad
mix. And I was completely overwhelmed. It was just, I didn't think salad greens could actually be that different, but they were the freshest, plumpest, most delicious, crunchiest, they were salad greens. They were just beautiful. So if there's one thing that we'd like everyone to give a go, would just be to jump on board, try out the platform, place an order, and see if we can support our local growers through this hard time. There is a couple of little questions that have come through, one from a corporate point of view. So Belinda's asked around the private sector, and in your opinions, what role does the corporation play in food security from your perspective?
I'll jump in first, Bubble, if you want. So Belinda, it's a really interesting question, and it operates at so many different levels. And again, I'd recommend going and listening and reading Jennifer Clapp's work on corporatization of food systems. It's scary, and but I guess, and I can draw more closely on the discussions that we had with people as part of our project. And we did case studies with 9 civil society organisations, and that was one of the questions that we asked them was, what was the influence of the corporate world in the work that they did. And we were kind of expecting that we'd be having those discussions around big food and the negative implications of that. But some of them were actually really interesting and quite positive. So things such as, particularly during the lockdowns in Victoria, a lot of residents couldn't get to supermarkets that they might normally do because they were outside their 5-kilometre radius. But their local supermarkets actually didn't stock any culturally appropriate foods for them. So we're talking about culturally and linguistically diverse communities and residents that were locked out of being able to access their food systems. So this particular organisation was working with the main chain supermarkets, with Coles and Woolies, in those local regions, to get them to increase their, how we have the international food aisle. So there were some really positive stories around that. I guess from a slightly different perspective, in terms of, you mentioned particularly food security as well, we've got that classic model of food relief coming from Woolworths and Coles in terms of Oz Harvest and Second Bite. And like, I don't even want to say it nicely, like it's a flawed system. It's a band-aid solution that makes the big corporate ones look good, but actually does nothing to provide food to people with dignity, and it does nothing at the systemic level to address the fact that we are so wasteful. It's often the foods that are less nutritious, or just weird stuff that honestly people that are into food might not even cook, like parsnips. And it's kind of like, if you're giving them to a homeless shelter for people to access, like, what, that person doesn't want to have to cook parsnip. So yeah, I guess my absolutely strong opinion, but backed up by many other people that I work with, is that part of the corporate world it's not a solution. It's just perpetuating problems at all levels.
Thanks.
Verbal.
Yeah, I think the private sector has a big role to play within our food system, because they have so much power. And I think one of the things, and not actually per se looking directly at food security, because I think the food system is much bigger than that, but and it's just one of the issues that it has. But for big corporation or the private sector to actually consider the environment and the health of our community within the way they operate would be a really good start, because I think corporations have so much power, and we've seen it when, for example, Woolies and Coles stopped with their single-use plastic bags at checkout, that they can have such a big impact. The really hard thing is that they often are driven by their bottom line and of making money and cutting costs wherever possible, and actually working in a really unsustainable way with our producers, as well as giving our community the perception that food needs to be cheap or should be cheap, which food should be at a price that is good for the people who grow it, the people who eat it, as well as for the environment. And I think that's where big corporations have a role. Whether they want to play that role is probably, I would hope they would, but they are not seeming to want to do that, because that would impact their bottom line. And the same is for their pursuits in donating food, which is fantastic, but obviously it's a cost-saving activity where they don't need to dispose of the amounts of waste that they're actually producing. So when it comes to food security, I find it really hard. I actually have never really thought about the private sector directly impacting food security. I think one of the big things is that I guess increasing welfare payments would be a really big one, but again, that is not the private sector. I'm not sure. Sorry.
I was on mute. That's okay. No, but these are complex problems with no simple solutions. We do have another question from Ian, and it's around green space. So with lots of people renting and local increase of high density housing in Wollongong in particular, he's asking if we know whether Wollongong Council is considering opportunities to convert local green space into more community gardens. Would anyone have any knowledge of that?
I don't have any knowledge of that, but I think it's a fantastic idea, and we 100% should do that. Yeah, I think in particular with the rising cost of food, I think growing our own food is definitely one of the avenues to combat a little bit of that, as well as that it gives that really beautiful opportunity to connect to food in such a different way, to realize how long it takes to actually grow cauliflower, which I've never actually been able to do because somehow insects tend to eat it before I do. But yes, it is definitely something that we've been advocating for, have included in most of our submissions to our councils, but it's, as far as I know, at this point, not included per se in the CSP as an action that they're going to undertake. Amy,
Yeah, Ian, hi. So I've also, as part of the research project, I've been invited to speak at a Community Gardens Australia event, which meant that I actually dug into all of the community gardening policies that we found in the 2 states, so in New South Wales and Victoria, that we're looking at. So we hadn't actually looked at exactly what was in them because we had a lot of documents and there wasn't enough time. So it was more like, does local council have a community gardening policy? Tick. Wollongong does have one. Last I checked, it's not actually available on the website, so you have to know to contact council to ask for it. The CSP, as Bevel said, didn't have much, if anything, about food in it. There is nothing in the budget either. So in the most recent round of feedback that closed at the end of last month, I think it was, I wrote in, drawing on the evidence of the research that we have, to say that Wollongong and, we're Illawarra, like the Illawarra local governments are in a really good position. Oh no, sorry, this is Wollongong CSP. So Wollongong, yeah, let's do more. As I mentioned in my recorded presentation, there's that climate framing, community gardening comes into that. Bevel, you mentioned that Kath's on the call, so she might be able to
I think I saw her, but I
jump in and confirm this. So I wrote in, I know that Bevel wrote in, I know that people from Winona Community Garden wrote in, who I'm in touch with here through Green Connect, and I'm also a member at that garden. And Kath came back to us and said that council was now either definitely going to include or considering including something around, this is very vague terms, including the responsibility for locating community gardens or something. What that means, I'm not sure, and I'd really love some clarification. Like, is that they're going to go out and map arable land that's not contaminated, suitable for community food production, and preserve it for that use and that use only? That's what I'd really love to see. I doubt that level of commitment will get up. It took about 3 years or 4 for Winona Community Garden, from the moment they approached council and said that they wanted one in their suburbs to the day that they dug dirt. That's too long. We don't have that much time to do each time we want a community garden. So there are very few local governments in those policies that I looked at, as in 1 or 2 maybe, that mentioned that they already had X number of sites, 4 sites identified that were suitable for community gardening. Most councils work in a backward approach where you have to go to them and then they will help you with the onus on a community gardening group being the ones identifying where they might want to grow food. And then it has to go through like assessment, is this suitable? What's the flood situation? Consultation with local residents about whether they'd oppose it if a community garden, like, it's a crazy long process. That there's another approach that you go and do the work now and you identify those lots of land and you save them for community gardening and keep them that way so that they can be used in the future.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Bevel. I think Kath did appear, but I can't see her still out there, so she may have left again.
Yeah.
But
Ian, Kelly, can we jump straight to Ian's question, because I think that's actually really fantastic.
Yeah, no, he's put in a follow-up.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
What you need from us as a community to help convince council that we do need this.
So make noise. Make noise all the time. Make noise when there's, if the CSP is up for consultation, that moment's passed now for the next 4 years or whatever. Make noise, but it doesn't have to be then. There's opportunities outside of that formal consultation process. You go and write to your councillors. You go and you give them a phone call. And I'd actually, again, we can send some links around afterwards. I recently listened to a podcast that one of our old mates from Wollongong, Bevel and I know, host. She's up in Brisbane now, but she spoke to another researcher, academic called Catherine Cullerton. But the podcast is Foodies in the Field. So if you type Foodies in the Field in to Google, you might find it. And so Catherine's talking all about policy and policy advocacy, and she's in the food world too, so it relates, but it relates to any topic that you're interested in. She has some really good tips about the practicalities of approaching your MP or your councillors. And an interesting one for me was she said, don't email them. Write them a letter, go and see them in their office. They are obligated to speak to you if you rock up, and they get too many emails. Write them a letter, and again, they're obligated to respond. But that really shocked me. So my other thing, just, and Verbal can then maybe follow up on this, is like, actually join FFI and be involved. So they'll put out emails and newsletter pieces whenever there's an opportunity where they need volume. So that might be opposing the McDonald's development, whatever it might be. Like, do it. Don't just kind of go, oh, I don't have time to make that letter. Like, just do it. The volume is important. The numbers behind it are important. So Verbal can put forward submissions like on behalf of the FFI community and say, you know, we've got X members, but it's actually still having all the individuals writing and saying, we want this as well, or we don't want that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Like, for anyone who's not involved in FFI, just sign up. And so when Amy's referring to CSP, it's the Community Strategic Plan. So all the local councils have just finished this consultation in community. It goes out for public comment and submissions, which they've indicated is closed now. But if you join FFI, just keep an idea on their socials, Healthy Cities socials. And like Amy said, if there's ever an opportunity where there's power in volume, we'll always kind of put it out. Manami's also added there the Public Health Nutrition from Foodies in the Field podcast. And sometimes we'll make it really, really easy. So we might put out a couple of sentences that you can cut and paste into your own letter to just help get the message out there really, really quick. And the other thing, the idea I've had is maybe that we will hold a Friday forum on community gardens, and we can put it out for the community and to, you know, really have lots of discussion around how we get the public space rezoned or reutilised, and how we can just get communities up and running. Because as Amy said, Wollongong Council does have staff in this space, but it's obviously just very, very difficult to find. So that's given me food for thought for something that we can perhaps help facilitate local communities take a bit of action on. Well, I think we're very close to finishing. If there's no other questions, I just ask if Verbal or Amy have any final comments you'd like to close on. No?
Just get involved.
Yeah. Verbal and I had this discussion. We met up to think about what we were going to present in this, and she really wanted to highlight, like, there's all this terminology around what we as people are in this. Like, yes, I'm a person. I'm an eater. I'm like, we use the term consumer. Like, I'm a consumer, but I'm an eater. But we're actually citizens, and I kind of already mentioned that in my presentation. Like, citizenship means involvement, and this matters for everyone. Everyone eats food. If we're going to have a planet left when I'm old, I'm worried about that. I'm genuinely really worried about my friends that are having kids and the future that they're going to have. And we can't muck around. We don't have the time. So it's really about making that noise. And maybe we've got a window now that we've got a Labor government, but like, we still got to push that. We still got to push that we want these things so that they keep up the promises.
And there are some advocacy tips on the Food Fairness website as well. So we will put some stuff in emails. So a copy of Amy's slides in particular that I know were a bit blurry on screen, so apologies for that. I've got some links in the chat, and we can send all these around via email to everyone who registered. So thanks again.
Actually, Kelly, can I interject with one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, quite literally coming off what Ian was saying. Everyone, after this, go straight away and email your local councillors and your MP and say, hey, I listened to this really great discussion hosted by Healthy Cities Illawarra. I'm really disappointed to hear that our local governments aren't addressing food. Make noise now.
I love your advocacy.
Friday afternoon homework, please, everyone. Look at the Wollongong Online Farmers Market. Go and make some noise.
Okay, everyone. Yes. Off you go. Amy has spoken.
Thanks,
there's no better way to end it there. Enjoy your weekend, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining all.